Hello and welcome back to another episode of Soulmates, Commander Abridged. Today we have a wild game that includes commanding board states, an insane amount of ramp, a pirate monkey who loves treasure, and a dash of group hug chaos to top it all off. Before we get into the turn order, remember to like the video and subscribe for more Commander content like this in the future. Now let's get started. Going first is CJ playing a beefed up version of his Karametra God of Harvest deck. He wants to ramp out as many lands as he can onto the battlefield as quickly as possible with ramp spells and creature loops, ending the game by dropping in hefty land matters finishers that will wipe his opponents out. Second is Tom playing Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter, a tempo-oriented deck looking to ramp, interact with the table, and generate loads of value to dominate the board. To top it all off, there's some spicy top deck manipulation to get the ball rolling. Next up is me playing Narset, Enlightened Master. Built with randomness, chaos, and group hug in mind, the goal is to ramp fast to get Narset out, make her unblockable with ores or equipment, and swing to cast spells for free off the top of my library. However, the spells from the top sometimes help opponents, or can change up the battlefield wildly, leading to some fun and exciting turns. Finally, there's Adam playing his Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer deck. His pet deck with one game plan: cast the monkey as much as possible, create treasure tokens, and steal things from his opponents. Now that we know what's up, let's get right into the game and see who comes out on top. CJ starts off by playing a Plains and then passes to Tom, who plays a Yavimaya Coast, tapping it to take 1 damage for a green mana to cast a Birds of Paradise. He passes the turn. I play a Temple of Enlightenment, scrying 1, opting to put it on the bottom of my library, and pass the turn. Adam plays a mountain and taps it immediately to play his commander Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. With no haste to swing, he has to pass the turn. CJ plays a forest and has a turn 2 play for once, casting a Dawn Trader Elk, passing the turn right after. Tom plays a snow-covered island and then casts a Thrasios, Triton Hero. With nothing else, he passes the turn to me. I play a Spire Bluff Canal and cast an Arcane Signet, which I use immediately to cast a Soothsaying. I pass the turn to Adam. He plays an Exotic Orchard, then heads right into combat, swinging Ragavan at me since I am the only one without a blocker. I take 2 damage and Ragavan triggers, creating Adam a treasure token and exiling a Teferi, Master of Time, from the top of my library. He doesn't have enough mana to play it though, so it remains exiled as he passes the turn to CJ. He plays a Bountiful Promenade as his land for the turn, then passes to Tom, keeping up Dawn Trader Elk as a blocker. Tom plays a snow-covered forest and casts an Azusa, Lost But Seeking, playing a Halimar Depths as his second land for the turn, which comes in and allows him to look at the top 3 cards of his library and put them in any order. He then plays a Castle Vantress as his third land for the turn, passing right after. I start off with a Words of Wisdom, which has me draw 2 cards and the rest of the table draw 1. I play a Fury Calm Snarl as my land for the turn, or as Tom puts it,
that might be the worst named land in all of the game.
Fury Calm Snarl. That's pretty bad.
I hate all of this.
You don't like a snarl?
Yeah, you know what? I should be more appreciative of the snarls.
Dude, you should snarl more. You'd like it.
That's a word that's really easy to say.
Since I don't have a Plains or Mountain to show off, it enters the battlefield tapped, and I pass the turn. Adam starts off with a mountain and casts a Cliffhaven Kitesail, which upon entering the battlefield, attaches to Ragavan, making it a flying monkey. He enters combat and swings Ragavan at CJ, who doesn't block and takes the 2 damage, triggering Ragavan. He exiles a forest from the top of his library, and Adam creates a treasure token. With nothing else, he passes the turn to CJ, who activates his Dawn Trader Elk's ability at Adam's end step, grabbing a Plains, which enters the battlefield tapped. CJ starts his turn with a forest and then taps out for his commander, Karametra, God of Harvests. Tom teases an Arcane Denial but opts to save it for the future.
Is Karametra cool?
Yes.
Mr. Blue.
Do you like to draw cards?
Arcane
What do you mean?
Denial.
What do you like more, drawing cards or having your commander?
Well, I need to get the lands out of my hand, if we're being honest.
Okay, you can have it.
After Karametra resolves, CJ passes the turn. Tom plays a snow-covered island as his land for the turn and casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. He passes to me, a peasant who cannot afford his commander yet, keeping up his mana for some flash speed shenanigans. I meme at the end of his turn, activating Soothsaying for 1, looking at the top 1 card of my library and putting it back in any order. I draw the card I looked at and start off with a Solemn Simulacrum, grabbing an island and putting it onto the battlefield tapped. I play a Glacial Fortress as my land for the turn, which now comes in untapped, and I pass the turn. Adam plays a mountain and then enters combat and swings Ragavan at CJ again, who has no blocks. Before damage, Adam casts a Raking Claws, giving Ragavan double strike, triggering his ability twice after CJ takes 4 damage. CJ exiles a Wood Elves and a Stone Cloaker from the top of his library, and Adam creates 2 treasure tokens. In his second main phase, Adam casts the Wood Elves from exile, looks through his deck for a forest that doesn't exist, then shuffles. He passes the turn. CJ plays a forest, then casts a Felidar Retreat. Tom responds to this with the Arcane Denial he was threatening CJ with before. Rashmi then triggers, and Tom reveals a Leyline of Anticipation from the top of his library, which has a higher mana cost than the Denial, so it goes right into his hand. With Felidar Retreat now countered and in his graveyard, CJ casts an Eternal Witness to get it back to his hand. On cast, Karametra triggers, and he grabs a Plains from his library and puts it onto the battlefield tapped, passing the turn right after. On Tom's upkeep, Arcane Denial's delayed trigger resolves, allowing Tom to draw a card and CJ to draw 2 cards. He then draws for his turn and casts a Wilderness Reclamation. Rashmi then triggers, and Tom reveals a snow-covered island from the top of his library, which goes to his hand. He plays it right away as his land for the turn. He follows this up with a Leyline of Anticipation, which definitely gets a reaction from the table.
I'm concerned.
Yeah, a little bit.
About him.
No.
Definitely, dude. It's definitely very scary.
I'm vibing, dude.
He ends his turn, triggering his Wilderness Reclamation and untaps all of his lands. I start off with an Emergence Zone as my land for the turn, then after a deliberation with Tom...
I want to play Narset, but Tom, are you going to counter it? Is the question.
Are we buddies? That's the real question.
We're buddies. You have a full front assault right now, and I have nothing to make it unblockable at the moment.
Knowing full well that Narset and Karametra are both decks that nobody deals with for 8 turns and then win.
Yeah, that's fair.
I will allow you to cast your commander.
Okay, I'll cast the commander then.
I cast Narset, Enlightened Master, and pass the turn right after. Adam starts off with a mountain, then enters combat and swings Ragavan at CJ yet again. CJ has no blocks and takes 2 damage, triggering Ragavan. He reveals a Heliod's Intervention from the top of his library, and Adam creates a treasure token. In his second main phase, he casts Heliod's Intervention where X equals 4, targeting my Susang and Arcane Signet, and Tom's Wilderness Reclamation and Leyline of Anticipation. In response, Tom casts a Treasure Cruise, exiling the Arcane Denial in his graveyard to cast it. This triggers Rashmi, revealing a Bark Channel Pathway, which goes into his hand. I also have a response, paying 1 into the Susang before it gets destroyed to look at the top card of my library. After Tom draws his 3 cards, Heliod's Intervention resolves, and the targets are destroyed. Adam passes the turn. CJ starts off with a forest and casts Felidar Retreat, which doesn't get countered and resolves this time. He follows this up with a Nissa's Pilgrimage, grabbing 2 basics from his library, putting 1 onto the field tapped, and 1 into his hand. This triggers Felidar Retreat, and CJ chooses to create a 2/2 cat token with it. He passes the turn. Tom plays 3 lands for his turn, and ominously passes the turn over to me, keeping all of his mana up. I draw and head straight into combat, swinging Narset at Adam. This triggers Narset, and I exile Teo, the Shield Mage, Shivan Reef, an island, and Inevitable Betrayal from the top of my library. With no instant speed plays, combat proceeds to blockers, and Adam puts his Wood Elves in front of it, which dies as the damage step resolves. In my second main, I start by casting Teo, the Shield Mage, from exile. I follow that up by casting Inevitable Betrayal, targeting Tom. I grab a stunt double from his deck and put it onto my battlefield, choosing Ragavan as the creature it comes in as. I follow this up with a Gate to the Aether, giving everyone a chance to get some free permanents onto the battlefield at their upkeep. With nothing else, I pass to Adam. Adam untaps and Gate to the Aether triggers in his upkeep. He reveals a Zephyr Boots from the top of his library, which he chooses to have come into play. He plays a mountain as his land for the turn, and Tom asks to see his stunt double.
James, can you pass me that stunt double real quick?
Yeah, dude. Here you go.
During our exchange, Adam swings Ragavan at CJ yet again, who has no blocks and takes 2 Flying Monkey commander damage. CJ reveals an Elvish Visionary from the top of his library, and Adam creates a treasure token. In his second main, Adam casts Elvish Visionary, and upon entering, he gets to draw a card. He then casts a Seize the Spoils, discarding a Traitorous Blood to cast it. He draws 2 cards and creates a treasure token. He passes the turn. CJ untaps and in his upkeep, Gate to the Aether triggers. He reveals a Mirari's Wake from the top of his deck and puts it onto the battlefield. Now my guy has double mana! He plays a Plains, triggering Felidar Sovereign, and chooses to create another 2/2 kitty. He follows this up with a Thrashing Brontodon. On cast, Karametra triggers, so CJ starts looking in his deck for a Mistveil Plains, which enters the battlefield tapped. In response to the Brontodon, Tom flashes in Teferi, Mage of Zalfir, giving Tom's not yet casted creatures flash, and preventing the table from playing any spells at instant speed. This triggers Rashmi, and Tom reveals a Tishana, Voice of Thunder, from the top of his library, which goes right into his hand since it costs more than Teferi. When Mistveil Plains enters the battlefield, Felidar Sovereign triggers again, and this time CJ puts a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures and gives them all vigilance until the end of the turn. He heads to combat and swings his beefed up Eternal Witness and one of the cat tokens at Tom. Tom doesn't block and takes 8 damage. After combat, CJ passes through his second main and goes to end his turn. At his end step, Tom flashes in a Nightpack Ambusher, then goes to start his turn. He untaps and the Gate to the Aether triggers on his upkeep. He reveals a snow-covered forest from the top of his library, which he puts onto the battlefield. He passes again with all his mana up, not scared of anyone, because he's the instant speed captain now. Since he didn't cast any spells, Nightpack Ambusher triggers and he creates a 2/2 wolf token. I untap and the Gate to the Aether triggers on my upkeep. I reveal a Mind's Aglow, which stays on the top of my library since it isn't a permanent, and I draw it for the turn. I head straight into combat and swing both Narset and Ragavan at Adam. On attack, Narset triggers and I exile 3 lands and a Glimpse of Tomorrow from the top of my library. Combat then proceeds, and Adam blocks Ragavan with Elvish Visionary, killing them both. Narset doesn't get blocked and deals 3 commander damage to Adam. In my second main, I float all my mana and cast Glimpse of Tomorrow, shuffling all my permanents, except for Narset who goes back into the command zone, into my library and reveal that many cards from the top, putting all permanents revealed this way onto the battlefield. I reveal a Talisman of Curiosity, Eel Umbra, Second Sight, Boros Charm, Clifftop Retreat, Boros Signet, Bedlam, Izzet Signet, Monastery Siege, and Sol Ring. I put the Talisman of Curiosity, Clifftop Retreat, Bedlam, both Signets, Monetary Siege, choosing dragons, and Sol Ring onto the battlefield under my control, and I put Eel Umbra onto Ragavan for my buddy Adam. Boros Charm and Second Sight go straight to the bottom of the library in a random order. I then use my floating mana and 2 more from the Sol Ring to recast Narset Enlightened Master. I then cast Mind's Aglow, which has Joined Forces, allowing anyone to add mana into the spell, drawing us all that many cards. I put 4 mana into it, Adam adds 1, CJ adds 15, and Tom adds 2, for a total of 22 cards for the table to draw, basically a fourth of our decks. After the spell resolves, I play a Spirebluff Canal as my land for the turn, then end my turn discarding a bunch of cards in cleanup. Adam starts off with a Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, as his land for the turn, and follows it up with a Sol Ring, then a Grim Monolith, then a Mana Volt. He casts a Brass's Bounty with 7 lands on the field, and in response, Tom flashes in Crafty Cutpurse. Brass's Bounty then resolves, and the 7 treasures get created on Tom's field instead of Adam's. Tom remembers he has a Rashmi trigger after the resolution, so he reveals an Avenger of Zendikar from the top of his library, which goes into his hand. Adam enters combat and swings Ragavan at CJ, which can't be blocked due to Bedlam. He takes 3 damage from the monkey and exiles a forest from the top of his library. Due to the Crafty Cutpurse, the treasure Adam would have made from the Ragavan trigger instead gets created on Tom's board. In his second main, Adam casts a Generator Servant and goes to his end step, discarding a bunch of cards in cleanup. CJ starts off with an Emeria, the Sky Ruin, as his land for the turn, missing his Felidar Retreat trigger, and casts a Primordial Sage, allowing him to draw whenever he casts a creature spell. On cast, this triggers Karametra, and he grabs a forest from his library, which enters the battlefield tapped. He remembers the Felidar Retreat trigger this time, opting to make another 2/2 cat. He follows this up with a Panharmonicon, casting a Beast Whisperer right after. This causes a bunch of triggers, which he orders by grabbing a Plains from his library first, triggering the Felidar Retreat, then drawing a card off of Primordial Sage. With the Retreat trigger, he creates another cat token, and mistakenly thinks Panharmonicon triggers the Retreat and Primordial Sage twice, so he gets another draw and another cat made. When questioned after the game, the culprit said this: He follows that play up with a Sakura Tribe Scout, triggering the Sage, the Whisperer, and the God. CJ finds the plains for his battlefield first, triggering the Retreat, which again he thinks happens twice, creating another 2 kitties. He draws a card from both the Primordial Sage and the Beast Whisperer, realizing now that those triggers don't get doubled. He sacrifices the Elder right away to grab another plains, which enters the battlefield tapped, again triggering the Felidar Retreat, which he thinks happens twice, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on all his creatures and giving them Vigilance. He casts an Okame Adversary next, again triggering everything. He grabs the land from his library first, triggering the Retreat again, giving everything 2 more counters, then draws 2 more cards. He enters combat and swings his Eternal Witness, Thrashing Brontodon, and his 2 cat tokens that can attack this turn at Tom. Tom responds by casting a Dig Through Time, exiling some cards from his grave to help cast it. Rashmi triggers and he reveals a Mystic Remora, which he casts for free. Dig Through Time then resolves. He looks at the top 7 cards of his library and grabs 2 of them to go to his hand. He then casts a Beast Within targeting Thrashing Brontodon, which CJ then activates before it's destroyed. He targets the Cliffhaven Kite Sail equipped to Ragavan, which gets destroyed. Beast Within then fizzles with no target and Tom takes 24 damage, going to 6. CJ ends the turn, and on his end step, Tom flashes in a Guardian Augmenter, giving Rashmi +2/+2 and Hexproof. He also casts a Wing Coatl. CJ discards a bunch of cards on cleanup, and Tom starts his turn. To save some time waiting for CJ to discard, Tom shows off his next turn, which will no doubt give him the win. He casts Tashana Voice of Thunder, drawing 10 more cards when it enters, then casts an Overwhelming Stampede, which gives everything +35, +35, and trample, killing everyone in combat immediately. And now, instead of a conclusion, I will give you our endgame banter.
Woo! I knew the 16/16, or adding 16 cards to the pool was...
you did that,
Let's do that.
CJ.
That's pretty beefy, dude.
Alright. What's the best card we played the entire game?
Mind's Glow, no doubt.
The fairy is what won him in the game.
Is it?
Yes.
I didn't have any instant speed interaction.
Yeah, were you
So
gonna
I
do
think
anything about
Mind's
that?
Glow was what won him the game.
Yeah.
Definitely. Which I didn't tell you to put any mana in. I had to ask. Part of the card.
Alright, so what do you think about the upgrades to Karametra? Does it feel like it can hang now?
It always felt like
Yeah,
it could.
definitely. It definitely always felt like that.
That was the most that I've ever seen from that. But that was pretty bad.